Good evening. It's Friday, August 28th. Thousands of people from around the country commemorate the anniversary of the massive Civil Rights March on Washington in 1963 today, demonstrating against systematic racism and police brutality in America as a wave of protests continues across the country.
Some say to me, Reverend Al, y'all ought to denounce those that get violent, those that are looting. All of the families have denounced looting. We will speak against the looting. But when will you speak against wrong police shooting?
Accepting his renomination by the Republican Party as president, Donald Trump stages a spectacle fit for royalty at the White House last night.
It was mind-boggling. It was mind-boggling, the lawlessness of this convention in the name of law and order. And that is the calling card of fascist politics.
At a campaign rally in New Hampshire today, Trump again threatens to call in the National Guard to deal with demonstrators in the nation's capital. Under a proposal endorsed today by Governor Newsom and state legislative leaders, Californians who can't pay rent because of the coronavirus could stay in their homes through at least January 31st, but only if they pay a portion of some missed payments. Governor Newsom also today announces a new process for reopening businesses that is slower and more gradual than what the state tried earlier this summer. And a Foster Farms chicken processing plant in Central California ordered to shut down after it became the site of one of the largest and most severe COVID-19 outbreaks in the state. Nearly 360 workers infected, 8 have died. The plant thus far refused to close. From Pacifica Radio, KPFA in Berkeley, KPFK in Los Angeles, this is the Evening News. I'm Mark Miracle. Capping a week of protests and outrage over the police shooting of an African-American man in Wisconsin, civil rights advocates today denounced police and vigilante violence against Black Americans at a commemoration of the 1963 March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. Thousands gathered near the steps of the Lincoln Memorial, where the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. delivered his historic I Have a Dream address, a vision of racial equality that remains elusive for millions of Americans. Reporter Nick Harper at the Lincoln Memorial.
Thousands of people lined up from dawn to get a spot in front of the Lincoln Memorial to raise their voice against police violence against black people. 5 hours of speeches culminate in a march to the statue of Martin Luther King. Speakers today, including relatives of black Americans killed by police in recent months, point out that the racism and inequality Reverend King campaigned against continues today. I'm Nick Harper in Washington.
Today's demonstration came on the heels of yet another shooting by a white police officer of a black man, 29-year-old Jacob Blake in Kenosha, Wisconsin. That sparked days of protest and vigilante violence that killed 2 people. KPFA's Kate Ida filed this report.
Just a few days ago, Jacob Blake, a 29-year-old black father of 6, was shot in the back 7 times by a white policeman in Kenosha, Wisconsin. Following a week of protests and outrage sparked by the shooting, civil rights advocates denounced violence against black Americans at a commemoration of the 1963 March on Washington. Blake's father, Jacob Blake Sr., addressed the crowd of thousands who gathered near the steps of the Lincoln Memorial, where Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. delivered his historic I Have a Dream speech.
There are 2 systems of justice in the United States. There's a white system and there's a black system. The black system ain't doing so well. But we're gonna stand up. Every black person in the United States is gonna stand up. We're tired. I'm tired of looking at cameras and seeing these young black and brown people suffer. We're gonna hold court today on systematic racism. Guilty. Yeah. Guilty. Guilty! Racism against all of us. And we're not taking it anymore.
The march is one of the largest political gatherings in Washington, D.C. since the coronavirus pandemic began. Participants stood in lines that stretched for blocks, and organizers took temperatures as part of coronavirus safety measures. Organizers reminded the demonstrators to practice social distancing and wear masks. Reverend Al Sharpton, whose civil rights organization, the National Action Network, planned the event, demanded acknowledgement of structural racism and the passage of police reform legislation.
It's time we have a conversation with America about your racism, about your bigotry, about your hate, about how you would put your knee on our neck while we cry for our lives. We need a new conversation. You act like it's no trouble to shoot us in the back. You act like it's no trouble to put a chokehold on us while we scream, "I can't breathe," 11 times. All of the families have denounced looting. What we haven't heard is you denounce shooting.
Sharpton said protesters should demand U.S. voter protections in the memory of civil rights legend John Lewis, saying, quote, "Demonstration without legislation will not lead to change," end quote. In July, after Lewis's death, Democratic senators reintroduced legislation that would restore part of the 1965 Voting Rights Act, which had been gutted by the U.S. Supreme Court in 2013. The law had required states with a history of voter suppression to have federal clearance before changing voting laws. In the absence of federal monitoring and the threat of intervention, numerous states have imposed obstacles to voting, such as onerous voter ID laws. Sharpton also said protesters should pressure the Senate to pass the George Floyd Justice in Policing Act, which would ban police use of chokeholds and end qualified immunity for officers, along with other reforms. Both measures are awaiting action in the Republican-controlled Senate. George Floyd's brother, Philanese Floyd, and his sister, Bridget Floyd, made emotional speeches on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial. Thousands of demonstrators chanted George Floyd's name, whose death at the hands of a white Minneapolis police officer in May incited a movement for racial justice which spread throughout the nation.
It's never been more clear than change right now. It's happening right now because we demand it. My brother George, he's looking down right now. He's thankful for everything that everybody is doing right now. Y'all showing a lot of empathy and passion, and I'm enjoying every last bit of it right now.
My brother cannot be a voice today. We have to be that voice. We have to be the change, and we have to be his legacy.
With the November presidential elections approaching, several speakers highlighted the importance of voting in the upcoming election. Martin Luther King III, a son of Martin Luther King Jr. and keynote speaker at the march, made a passionate plea for attendees to vote.
Our voting rights are under attack. We must vigorously defend our right to vote because those rights were paid for with the blood of those lynched for seeking to exercise their constitutional rights. We need to vote as if our lives and our livelihoods, our liberties depend on it, because they do. No person, no people are more keenly aware of the risk of disenfranchisement than those who've suffered from it. There's a knee upon the neck of democracy, and our nation can only live so long without the oxygen of freedom.
After the rally, the protesters marched to the Martin Luther King Jr. Memorial in West Potomac Park. Later in the evening, the Movement for Black Lives, a coalition of more than 150 Black-led organizations that make up the Black Lives Matter movement, will hold its virtual Black National Convention. A new Black political agenda will also be released. The platform will deepen calls for defunding police departments in favor of investments to healthcare, education, housing, and other social services in Black communities. Reporting for KPFA Pacifica Radio, I'm Kate Ida.
In an extravagant spectacle at the White House last night featuring fireworks, his name spelled out in lights, and grand opera singing, President Trump accepted the GOP renomination as president. Trump blasted Joe Biden as a weak career politician who will endanger Americans' safety in his speech on the South Lawn of the White House.
Joe Biden is weak. He takes his marching orders from liberal hypocrites who drive their cities into the ground while fleeing far from the scene of the wreckage.
Trump made no mention of Jacob Blake, shot and grievously wounded by a white Wisconsin police officer this week, or of the other black Americans killed by police, events that have sparked convulsive protests across the country. And while the coronavirus kills 1,000 Americans each day, Trump defied his own administration's pandemic guidelines to speak for 70 minutes to a tightly packed crowd of about 1,500 people, most of whom wore no masks. Still, Trump is promising to protect the American people.
Your vote will decide whether we protect law-abiding Americans or whether we give free rein to violent anarchists and agitators and criminals who threaten our citizens.
Reporter Lily Bolke has more.
President Donald Trump capped the Republican National Convention with an acceptance speech full of misleading claims and exaggerated attacks. Fear-mongering was a common thread throughout the evening.
No one will be safe in Biden's America. We launched the largest national mobilization since World War II. I have done more for the African-American community than any president since Abraham Lincoln.
Several speakers blamed Joe Biden and Democrats for the protests that have been ignited by police shootings and the subsequent violence in Kenosha, Wisconsin, and other cities. Yesterday, Biden responded with a reminder that, quote, the violence we're witnessing today is under Donald Trump, unquote. At a counter event held by anti-Trump Republicans calling themselves principled conservatives, television pundit Tara Setmeyer condemned all violence and criticized the Trump campaign for not doing the same.
They're not talking about the white militia 17-year-old who decided to go out and shoot some protesters the other night and murdered 2 people. They're not talking about the Proud Boys that are going out there and agitating on the streets. They're not talking about the Boogaloo movement, which is another far-right movement.
Trump's daughter and senior advisor Ivanka introduced her father and praised his agenda.
I know that his tweets can feel a bit unfiltered, but the results speak for themselves.
Those results are not appreciated by more than 100 former staffers to the late Republican Senator John McCain and over 30 from Mitt Romney's 2012 Republican presidential campaign. They all endorsed Biden yesterday. Congressional leaders Senator Mitch McConnell and Representative Kevin McCarthy gave remarks, as did Rudy Giuliani, Trump's lawyer and former New York City mayor, and the Democrat-turned-Republican Representative Jeff Van Drew. Here's McConnell.
I'm asking you to support Republican Senate candidates across the country and re-elect my friend, President Donald Trump.
Trump delivered his speech from the South Lawn of the White House. Fireworks spelled out his name on the National Mall, and Long Island tenor Christopher Macchio sang on a balcony over the presidential seal, continuing the convention's commingling of political activity and government business and raising concerns about potential Hatch Act violations. The Hatch Act is the law that prevents federal employees from conducting partisan activity in federal buildings or using their official capacity for politics. Yesterday, the Department of Homeland Security sent employees a memo cautioning against partisan activities, citing the Hatch Act as well as internal guidelines. This comes after Secretary of State Mike Pompeo recorded convention remarks while in Israel on an official visit, and Homeland Security Secretary Chad Wolf participated in a convention video of a naturalization ceremony at the White House. Here's Donald Sherman with Citizens for Ethics and Responsibility in Washington.
I think it's a testament to just how often and how blatantly this president is willing to use the tools of the government and the imprimatur of the government to help his flailing campaign.
From Pacifica Network and Public News Service, I'm Lily Bolke. Thanks for listening at pacificanetwork.org and publicnewsservice.org.
And you're listening to the evening news on KPFA Berkeley, KPFK Los Angeles, KFCF Fresno, online at kpfa.org. John Nichols, national correspondent for The Nation magazine, spoke about President Trump's acceptance speech last night and his GOP convention with Janine Eder, host of the Upfront Morning program.
What you recognize here is that this whole convention has been about scaring Americans, about telling Americans that that there's some sort of horrible threat on the horizon, something truly dangerous that's coming their way. And the absurdity of it is that Americans are already really scared. These are scary times. We have a pandemic that is not under control. We have mass unemployment rising in many areas. We have the reality of systemic racism finally being called out, but not being addressed in anywhere near the ways that it must be addressed. We have the reality of a climate crisis and events occurring constantly that tell us that the planet is in terrible peril. And I mean, people are anxious. And then here you have this president of the United States trying to take that anxiety to the next level. I don't think that we can fail to say that this is a very dangerous politics, and this is a politics that is designed to provoke hate and resentment and a voting not based on some sense of what the future of a better future, but in fact on a desire to truly divide the country and put some small portion of some small plurality in power rather than try and get to the heart of the matter. So I think it was an important speech because of what it told us.
Right. And the Republicans don't even have a policy platform.
No, they have no platform. I've heard about that as well this week. It's kind of amazing to me that at this point, when there is so much happening and so much in play, right? So many issues have been forced to the forefront as regards healthcare, jobs, racism, the climate, things that have always been challenges but are now amplified. This is exactly the time, whether you're a conservative or liberal, left or right, Democrat, Republican, to spell out where you're at, what you think about this and what you want to do. Instead, the Republican Party has said, whatever Trump says, and I put that in quote marks, if he says this, then that's what we are. In fact, their short statement, about a page that they put out, saying that they weren't going to do a platform, literally says that. It says that, if we had gotten together to do a platform, pretty much all we would have said is that we just think Trump is really great.
Biden's speech last night was delivered in the near robotic manner that he reverts to when sticking to the script that he's reading from the teleprompter. Jason Stanley, philosophy professor at Yale University and author of the book How Fascism Works, The Politics of Us and Them, told Mitch Jeserich, who hosted Pacifica's live coverage of the Republican convention, that Trump's performance might have been a deliberate attempt to package a more palatable Trump for the wider electorate rather than the more animated, combustive, off-the-cuff Trump of his raucous campaign rallies.
There were a bunch of speakers who were giving the sort of quasi-fascist or the message or the fascist message that there's only one legitimate political party. I mean, that was a theme throughout. There's only one legitimate party. Democracy is a sham. Democracy is corrupt. The only legitimate ruler is my father, our father, the head of the nation. And then we had some speeches, including Trump's, that were meant to dial back the alarm and the fear and the message of crisis. So altogether, I think there was a kind of incoherence, which is itself part of the kind of fascist politics we're seeing.
One of the things that stood out to me was the RNC's decision not to create a new platform for 2020. Instead, just to embrace the platform from 2016 and Trump's America's First platform. And I guess what I felt like here is what we really saw from the RNC was just a complete endorsement of Trumpism. And it's not even far right ideology or conservative ideology, but Trumpism of itself.
Yeah. It's the cult of the leader. The message of this convention was not that Trump fits into democracy. It was that Trump is Trump is a dictator, but he's a benevolent dictator. Trump is our father. Our country is going to be run by our father, and there's no legitimate challenge to him. Anyone who challenges him is a traitor. And then the convention was trying to say, and he's a benevolent dictator figure. So don't worry. He has our father, which must have been the most used phrase other than Marxist at this convention. Our father is not the scary man you've been told. He loves us. In other words, they did nothing to push aside fears of dictatorship, fears of authoritarianism. All they tried to do is soften the kind of authoritarian leader he will be. Oh, he's not a scary authoritarian leader. He'll be a good father to us all. So it was an incredibly anti-democratic convention, signaled, as you rightly point out, by abdicating all semblance of a platform other than we are Donald Trump's party.
That's Yale University's Jason Stanley, author of the book, How Fascism Works, The Politics of Us and Them. After spending a pandemic spring and summer tethered almost entirely to his Delaware home, Democratic presidential candidate Joe Biden announced plans today to take his presidential campaign to battleground states after Labor Day in his bid to unseat President Trump. Meanwhile, Trump traveled to New Hampshire today for a traditional political rally, looking to spread fear about the implications of a Biden victory to voters in battleground states with just over 2 months until Election Day. Trump's rally in Manchester tonight continued to flout coronavirus guidelines and launched an aggressive travel schedule heading into the fall campaign. Trump opened tonight with a rant against demonstrators who accosted guests departing his campaign speech at the White House last night. It marked the latest attempt to frame the general election as a dire choice between two futures for the nation, a theme he's expected to amplify on the campaign trail. They walked out to a bunch of thugs, Trump said, unhinged, manic rage. You ought to see last night in Washington. It was a disgrace. Trump said he directed White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows to study how to call in the National Guard to the nation's capital. Trump previously ordered federal troops to the district in May amid protests over the killing of George Floyd in the custody of Minneapolis police. Trump said tonight the agitators will go from rioting in the streets to running the halls of government, adding that voters need to support him to save democracy from the mob. The Republican convention this week heard only one Native American tribal leader, Myron Lizer, the vice president of the Navajo Nation, who endorsed President Trump's reelection. Antonia Gonzalez reports.
Other vocal Trump supporters were given primetime speaking spots, including South Dakota Governor Kristi Noem, who has a rocky relationship with tribes in her state on issues such as tribal COVID-19 border checkpoints. Her pro-oil development stance and support of riot-boosting laws at one point led to the Oglala Sioux tribe banning her from the reservation. In Noem's RNC speech, she mentioned the Constitution and the right to speak, assemble, and worship, which Native community leader and advocate Nick Tilson says is absurd.
Her actions as governor and her relationship to Indigenous people couldn't be more different and couldn't be more egregious in her actions in relation to our communities and to our people. And even right now, I mean, myself being an organizer, along with many of the other land defenders, are being over-persecuted by this exact same system because we stood in our right to freedom of assembly, because we stood in our right to worship and to pray in our language and in our culture, in our Black Hills. and we're being over-persecuted for those things.
Tilson, president and CEO of Indian Collective, is facing felony and misdemeanor charges for the July land defender action in the Black Hills, calling for treaty rights and land back in the hours leading up to President Trump's visit to Mount Rushmore. As far as relations with state and federal officials, Tilson says Indigenous people need to illuminate their issues and stand up to avoid erasure, adding national conversations need to include Indigenous values. I'm Antonia Gonzalez.
A judge today postponed a decision on whether a 17-year-old should be returned to Wisconsin to face charges in the killing of two people on the streets of Kenosha during unrest following the police shooting of Jacob Blake. The Illinois judge granted Kyle Rittenhouse's request to delay the extradition hearing to September 25th during a brief hearing today. Rittenhouse did not appear. Blake's shooting left him paralyzed and was caught on cell phone video. It sparked several nights of protest in Kenosha, making it just the latest focal point in a reckoning over policing and racial injustice that's gripped the country. The Kenosha Police Union today offered the most detailed accounting to date on the officers' perspective of the moments leading up to the police shooting of Blake, saying he had a knife and fought with officers, putting one of them in a headlock and shrugging off two attempts to stun him. The statement from Brendan Matthews, attorney for the Kenosha Professional Police Association, goes into more detail than anything that has been released by the Wisconsin Department of Justice, which is investigating. The Department of Justice had no immediate comment on the union's version of events. Ben Crump, an attorney for Blake's family, did not immediately respond to emails seeking comment. He said earlier this week that Blake was only trying to break up a domestic dispute and did nothing to provoke police, adding that witnesses did not see him with a knife. Crump has called for the arrest of the officer who shot Blake and for the other two officers involved in the shooting to be fired. Demands for social justice in cities like Kenosha and earlier in Minneapolis, Minnesota, have been linked to racial inequalities deeply rooted in the nation's history. But some researchers say these gaps are more prominent in Midwestern states like Wisconsin. Mike Moen has the story.
Many recent protests are sparked by high-profile police shootings, but those cries also point to systemic racism, and recent studies find the Midwest has some of the worst outcomes for black residents. Laura Dresser of the Center on Wisconsin Strategy says when blacks fled to these states in the days of slavery, they may have found job stability in some cities, but housing policies paved the road for future problems.
Because of the residential segregation and because of the racism and discrimination in outlying areas, it made moving to where economic opportunity grew much more difficult.
She adds that in struggling urban areas where black populations were forced to stay, an eroding economic base created a host of barriers that exist today. Dresser contributed to a 2019 report led by the Economic Policy Institute that said all 12 Midwestern states have deep racial disparities in areas from education and jobs to health and home ownership. In these states, Dresser says black elected leaders have tried calling attention to these issues, but their voices are often drowned out amid decades of growing political divisions. However, she notes if more of these voices can be heard, solutions can be found.
Think about raising the minimum wage or extending Medicaid, which the state of Wisconsin has not done. These two things would make an enormous difference.
Dresser says addressing school discipline disparities would help as well, so that black students would be in a better position to graduate and aim for future job success. Mike Moen, Public News Service.
Under a proposal endorsed today by Governor Gavin Newsom and state legislative leaders, Californians who cannot pay rent because of the coronavirus could stay in their homes through at least January 31st, but only if they pay a portion of some missed payments. The California court system has halted most eviction and foreclosure proceedings since April 6th because of the pandemic. But those protections will expire next Tuesday, prompting fears of a wave of evictions in a state that already has the largest homeless population in the country. Lawmakers have been rushing to come up with a bill to extend those eviction protections while balancing the impact on landlords, many of whom depend on rent payments to pay their mortgages. The proposal Newsom announced today would ban evictions for unpaid rent because of the coronavirus for money owed between March 1st and August 31st. Then, from September 1st through January 31st, tenants would have to pay at least 25% of their cumulatively owed rent, and if they don't, they could be evicted. Tenants would have to sign a document under penalty of perjury that says they cannot pay their rent because of a coronavirus-related economic hardship. Higher income renters, defined as people who make at least $130,000 a year or 13% of the area's median income, whichever is larger, must provide proof that they cannot pay their rent because of the virus. The bill would not forgive the missed payments. Tenants would still owe the money. Landlords could sue them to get the money back, and a judge could order them to pay it, but tenants could not be evicted. The bill does not protect landlords from foreclosures, but it would extend the California Homeowner Bill of Rights to small rental properties of up to 4 units. The Homeowner Bill of Rights provides some foreclosure protections, but right now it only applies to owner-occupied homes. The bill does not protect against all evictions. Evictions for reasons other than non-payment of rent, including lease violations, can resume on September 2nd. That's disappointing to some tenant advocacy groups who had been pushing for broader eviction protections in a state that's facing a housing shortage before the pandemic. San Francisco Assemblyman David Chu, the original bill's author, said the bill is weaker than what he wanted because he had to get 2/3 of the legislature to vote for it. That way, the bill would take effect immediately after the governor signed it. Otherwise, the bill would have not taken effect until January, leaving a lengthy gap with no protections against evictions. You're listening to the Evening News on KPFA in Berkeley, KPFK in Los Angeles, KFCF Fresno, online, kpfa.org. It's an hour-long newscast, airs each night at 6, and there's a half-hour edition on the weekends, and all of those newscasts are available online. They're archived there at kpfa.org. I'm Mark Miracle. California Governor Gavin Newsom announced a new process today for reopening businesses that is slower and more gradual than the existing plan. The new rules create a 4-tier color-coded system that counties will move through based on their number of coronavirus cases and the percentage of positive tests for the virus infection. KPFA's Christina Onestad reports.
The 4 coronavirus tiers are purple, red, orange, and yellow. They're based on rates of positive coronavirus infections and positive coronavirus tests per county. The vast majority of the state's counties are on the governor's existing watch list, 38 of them, and they'll start off on the lowest tier, purple. That represents about 2/3 of the state's population and nearly all Bay Area counties, except Solano. Purple means many indoor business operations will remain closed, like bars, nightclubs, theme parks, and tattoo parlors. Some indoor businesses can operate with modifications and/or outdoors, including restaurants, hair salons, malls, and indoor playgrounds and family entertainment centers. Governor Gavin Newsom says this new color-coded system will be simple, slower, and steady, but is meant to protect Californians from a looming twin-demic come flu season, which begins this fall in about a month.
We don't believe that there is a green light just says go back to the way things were or back to the pre-pandemic mindset. Quite the contrary. These are the guidelines, these color-coded county guidelines that we're putting forward to get us through this flu season, to prepare for the upcoming flu season, this twindemic as sorts, as we deal with flu and we deal with COVID-19.
Counties will have to remain in each tier for at least 21 days before they can move to the next tier and loosen their restrictions. During those 21 days, they have to meet the requirements to move into the next tier for 2 straight weeks. The goal is to get each county to the minimum tier, that's yellow, meaning there's less than 1 new coronavirus infection in each county per day, and less than 2% of tests are positive for the coronavirus. That's a significant jump from the previous standards of around 7%. But it's in line with several countries that have beat back the virus, says Emily Rush, Executive Director of CalPIRG, the California Public Interest Research Group, a nonprofit consumer and public health advocacy organization that's been calling for the state and the nation to entirely shut down and start over with a new, stringent reopening plan.
This isn't that shutdown, but what I like about this plan is that it moves very slowly to reopen, taking steps only after cases come down. We didn't get it right the first time, and we reaped the consequences of reopening too quickly. Here in California, we've lost more than 12,000 lives, most of those in the last 3 months when we started to reopen our economy just before Memorial Day. And so it's a relief, honestly, to see that Governor Newsom's new plan will remedy some of those mistakes and reopen cautiously and slowly and only after cases come down dramatically.
The new system comes nearly 2 months after Governor Newsom shut down bars, restaurants for indoor dining, and a slew of other businesses following a surge in cases after the state's first reopening attempt. The new system will now tighten counties' individual ability to reopen sooner than the state allows. The more infections and positive coronavirus tests, the tighter the restrictions on restaurants, retail shops, and other businesses. If a county fails to meet the metrics for remaining in its tier, it goes back. The state will also report virus statistics, such as case numbers, on a weekly basis. The approach is aimed at ensuring the state's infections don't skyrocket when businesses begin to reopen. California has the most confirmed coronavirus infections in the nation, with nearly 700,000, and the third most deaths, more than 12,500. But since the closures last month, the average number of daily cases has been falling, along with the infection rates and hospitalizations. They peaked July 21st at over 7,000. They've since dropped in 1 month to about 4,300. Newsom says they've learned a lot since the pandemic began, and their new response is for the long haul.
COVID-19 will be with us for a long time, and we need to adapt. This idea that it was going to go away in the summer during the warmer months, that somehow it would disappear based upon an assertion, a tweet, or a headline has obviously been substituted by a different reality that not only we're experiencing here in the state of California, but all across the nation. And so until there is a vaccine, until we have the kind of therapeutics that could substantially mitigate the spread and the impact of COVID-19, that we will simply need to adapt our behaviors.
People can learn what businesses are allowed to open and under what conditions on the state's coronavirus website under its new blueprint for a safer economy. That's covid19.ca.gov/safer-economy. I'm Christina Onnested, reporting for KPFA.
A chicken processing plant in Central California has been ordered to shut down after it became the site of one of the largest and most severe COVID-19 outbreaks in the state. According to a letter obtained from the Merced County Health Department, as reported by the Merced Sun-Star newspaper, the order to close the Foster Farms Livingston facility came after at least 358 employees tested positive for COVID-19 and 8 employees died because of the coronavirus. The plant was ordered to close on Wednesday, but Merced County's spokesperson Mike North said county officials on Thursday issued a 48-hour stay to the shutdown order. It expires tomorrow at 6 p.m. to, as he put it, help facilitate logistics associated with any necessary closure. North said the enforcement stay came after officials received a telephone call from the U.S. Department of Agriculture's Secretary for Food Safety. He gave no other details. President Trump issued an executive order earlier this year declaring the country's meat processing workers as essential employees who could be kept on the job despite the coronavirus pandemic. Foster Farms said in a statement the plant continued to operate today, that there would be comprehensive testing, and that follow-up testing would be done, quote, to ensure that COVID-19 prevalence remains minimal. The company did not address the shutdown order. The California Department of Public Health also issued a statement to support the county's action, with acting state health officer Erica Pan saying Foster Farms needs to understand it has a legal obligation to comply with public health orders and guidance, as well as an obligation to its workers and to the people of Merced County and surrounding counties. The county health department says the outbreak at the Livingston facility accounts for 18% of COVID-19 deaths in the county under the age of 65, 7% of total county deaths, 4 out of 10 coronavirus deaths in Livingston. Authorities say TikTok celebrities Bryce Hall and Blake Gray are facing criminal charges after they hosted recent parties in the Hollywood Hills, held despite a ban on large gatherings during the coronavirus pandemic. The Los Angeles City Attorney's Office said today that prosecutors have filed misdemeanor charges against Hall and Gray. The internet celebrities with millions of followers on TikTok share a home. City Attorney Mike Fewer said he was not aware of any COVID-19 cases directly linked to their parties. Paris police today ordered everyone to start wearing masks in public places beginning tomorrow. Up to now, they'd only been required in certain neighborhoods. The move came after the French Prime Minister requested it, and as COVID-19 cases are on the rise in France. To protect vulnerable populations, the Prime Minister urged people not to hold family parties and said grandparents should not pick up their grandchildren from school. The French Education Minister said, despite rising cases of COVID-19, that there's no reason to dial back plans to send France's nearly 13 million students back to class next week or to reopen school cafeterias. Russ Cullen of Feature Story News has more from Paris.
Cyclists, runners and the under-11s are exempt. The measure has already been brought in for other cities like Marseille and Toulouse. Also, the Tour de France organisers will attempt an almost behind-closed-doors event, urging spectators to stay away. Any people who do line the route must wear a face mask, and police say they will break up any crowds too close to one another.
And that's Russ Cullen reporting from Paris. Local health departments in the U.S. are pushing for a reversal of a recent change to coronavirus testing guidance, saying it's undermining their work to stop outbreaks. Two coalitions, which represent about 3,000 local health departments, released the letter today. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention quietly posted the change on Monday. The CDC previously had advised local health departments to test people who have been within 6 feet of an infected person for more than 15 minutes. But the new guidance says those people did not necessarily need a test unless they were more vulnerable to COVID-19. Public health experts have blasted the new guidance, saying testing contacts of infected people is key to keep outbreaks in check, and many infected people don't show any symptoms. India has recorded another high of more than 77,000 new coronavirus cases in the past 24 hours. Almost a half of those cases were detected this month alone. India has the third highest caseload after the United States and Brazil, and its fatalities are the fourth highest in the world. N.E.P.A reports from New Delhi.
More than 77,200 people tested positive in India in the last 24 hours, pushing the total cases past the 3.3 million mark. The country has also recorded more than 1,000 new deaths, taking the total death toll to over 61,000. India is currently the worst affected country in Asia and third only behind the US and Brazil in terms of total cases globally. But for more than 2 weeks now, India has reported the most infections daily compared to any other country. Experts say a resurgence in cases in some states because of lockdown measures being relaxed is to be blamed. Despite this, the government plans to further open up the economy. Reports suggest metro services will be the next to resume operations starting September. Neha Punya, New Delhi.
You're listening to the evening news on KPFA Berkeley, KPFK Los Angeles, KFCF Fresno, online at kpfa.org.
Hey everyone, this is Brian Edwards-Teekert.
And I'm Kat Brooks.
Weekday mornings we host Upfront.
2 hours of conversation about what's in the news and what should be.
Politics, technology.
Prisons, police.
What's happening in City Hall and at the State House.
In Washington and in the streets.
That's starting at 7 a.m., right after Democracy Now!
On Upfront.
California and Washington announced today they're leading a multi-state effort to sue the Trump administration yet again. Attorney General Javier Becerra said President Trump's attempt to roll back a foundational Nixon-era law on the environment known as NEPA is clearly illegal.
This is yet another effort by the Trump administration to undermine the foundation of our laws to protect our environment and our human environment health. Lawless behavior must be addressed, and now we have seen for the 100th time lawless behavior emanating from the White House.
President Trump announced his move against the National Environmental Policy Act, NEPA, last month. It governs how and when authorities must conduct environmental reviews before building highways, pipelines, chemical plants, and other major projects. Washington Attorney General Bob Ferguson said that California, Washington, and numerous other states have sued under NEPA to stop projects like coal leasing on federal lands. He called NEPA the Magna Carta of environmental law, saying it requires that you look before you leap.
Look at science. Look at the impacts. What's going to happen if we go forward? What the Trump administration wants to do is put blinders on before the federal government leaps. So we don't know what those impacts are. So look, I don't think it's a coincidence that after losing in court over and over and over again to California and Washington and a broad coalition of states on environmental cases, that the Trump administration wants to gut one of the key foundational environmental laws that we have. Transparency, science, informed decision-making, a voice for all communities. Those are the values embedded in NEPA. And those are the values that the Trump administration is trying to undermine.
Among the major changes in the Trump rule are new restrictions on when federal environmental reviews of projects would be required and new limits on how long federal agencies and the public have to evaluate and comment on the environmental impact of a project. Opponents say the changes the Trump administration is trying to push through would have a disproportionate impact on people of color who are more likely to live in communities affected by polluting facilities or projects. Hundreds of thousands of people across Louisiana are still without power or water, a day after Hurricane Laura paved a devastating path through the state. The hurricane's remnants are carrying tropical rain and wind across Tennessee. In hard-hit Lake Charles, Louisiana, the mayor says many of the city's 80,000 residents could be without basic services for days or weeks. Laura made landfall as one of the most powerful hurricanes to ever hit the U.S. At least 14 people died, and entire neighborhoods were destroyed. The National Weather Service says more tornadoes and flooding are possible as the system moves east. More than 750,000 homes and businesses are without power in Louisiana, Texas, and Arkansas. The extent of the damage came into focus in Louisiana. A massive plume of smoke visible for miles began rising from a chemical plant in the city of Lake Charles. Police said the leak was at a facility run by BioLab, which manufactures chemicals used in household cleaners and chlorine powder for swimming pools. Nearby residents were told to close their doors and windows. The fire was smoldering into the night. California's wildfires are slowly being corralled as cooler, humid weather and reinforcement help firefighters. Two of the largest fires in the state's history are both 35% contained today. Around 50,000 people have been allowed back home in the past 2 days as evacuation orders were lifted for counties in the San Francisco Bay Area and wine country. Hundreds of California fires in recent weeks have killed at least 7 people and burned more than 1,500 homes. But a heat wave eased this week and cooler weather is continuing. Despite the progress, CAL FIRE's ACLU unit chief, Shana Jones, said firefighters are still actively fighting fires locally and statewide.
So while first responders continue to battle the fires here in the LNU complex, new fires continue to be reported daily, locally, and throughout the state. Since August 15th, 700 new fires have been reported throughout the state. 46 new starts just yesterday. To date, more than 1.6 million acres have burned since August 15th of this year.
Nearly 2,500 square miles have burned in California since August 15th. The simultaneous fires have stressed firefighting resources. At least 15,000 firefighters are currently on the lines. California's firefighting agency this week held talks with the National Guard and California Conservation Corps about providing reinforcements as an already devastating wildfire season threatens to get even worse. The lightning-sparked fires grew to some of the largest in state history and pushed firefighters to the breaking point as they deal with complications from the coronavirus pandemic and depleted inmate crews. Daniel Berlant, chief of wildfire planning and engineering at CAL FIRE, said that the agency is concerned that historically it's September and October when the state experiences its largest and most damaging wildfires. Mark Davis, professor of environmental science and policy at the University of California, Davis, spoke with KPFA's Max Pringle.
It's a combination of topography and climate that we have. We're a Mediterranean climatic system, which means that we have wet winters and very dry summers. And so this is unusual. There's only about 7 Mediterranean climatic regions around the world. But it means that during the warmest part of the year, we're also in the driest part of the year, which means that our fuels are flammable starting in June in Northern California and building through August, September, October. We're really just starting to enter the most dangerous months of the fire season. And so this is getting going fairly early. But we also have a rain shadow effect caused by mountains going from west to east. And so we have some, those mountains block incoming moisture off the ocean. And so the eastern sides of mountains are dry. And this increases the likelihood of fires. So it's a combination of both our topography and our situation on the planet where we're at the right latitude and have a cold Pacific Ocean that results in a Mediterranean climate and very dry summers.
For people who've been living in California a long time or are native Californians, we're sort of used to hearing about wildfires, as you say, around this time of year every year. But never, in my memory, to this level and to this intensity. What do we owe that to?
Yeah, it's a but it also sounds like we're saying this almost every year, doesn't it? That we never remembered a year quite like this. And so, of course, our natural tendency is to think about changing climates and climate change and how climate change may be driving increased fire intensity and frequency. And that's surely part of it, that we are experiencing warmer summers and longer dry periods. And with future climate change, we're expected to have a higher probability of drought and prolonged drought in the future. and that these all increase fire risk. People have also pointed to things like forest management as having driven increased risks to fire and wildland fire. And this is this is also a contributing factor in the Sierras, where we have choices with respect to timber management, where we have cut less timber, and that there's been increasing density of trees in the Sierras, and so that increases fire risk. But honestly, Max, the 5 largest fires in California's history, 4 of which were in the last 3 years, are all coastal fires, and that the coastal vegetation management hasn't changed much, and it's not something we can manage our way out of through timber practices. The Mendocino complex, which is the largest fire on history, was in 2018. Started mostly in grasslands and shrublands and burned through some forested areas. But then these 2 lightning strike fires that are now the number 2 and 3 largest fires in California history, the SCU complex and the LNU complex, have each burned about 350,000 acres. They started by lightning, and they're north of Lake Berryessa and in the Coast Range, and mostly in Chaparral, and then south of the Bay Area, again in the Coast Range, in a lot of woodland and chaparral habitats.
Now, I know the last big fire, the fire that, last year, the year before, destroyed the town of Paradise, which in a really tragic event, those have been linked to human activity, namely our big utilities like PG&E. And talk a little bit about how human beings have contributed to these recent events.
Sure, yeah, that's the third major contributing factor to our increase in fire over the last couple of decades, is that we have more people out on the landscape doing more things, and it creates more opportunities for mistakes to happen. We also have an aging infrastructure of power, and that we have transformers that fail in high wind events occasionally, and PG&E has been culpable for some of these. So that we have a lot of these fires are human started, and now which makes this particular event this last week unusual, because we have so many fires started, all seemingly by, or at least the vast majority by natural causes through lightning. But as you probably know, September, October is often when we have large fire events, and it's often we have large wind events. And so one of the things that happens, as has happened in the last several years, is that we get a large wind event which causes trouble with power lines or transformers, and that this sparks a fire, and that a fire under high wind can move very, very quickly and become very, very dangerous very quickly. So one of the things that I think we're all watching right now is that there are so many fires out there. There's over 350 fires that were lit over the last week with these lightning strikes, many of which don't have any fire crews on them because of the efforts to save towns like Vacaville and Fairfield, which requires a lot of manpower to work those fires. If we don't get these fires under control, by the time we get some wind event that will surely be coming in September, October, one of these smaller fires could flare up and become a big problem.
Mark Davis is professor of environmental science and policy at the University of California. He spoke with KPFA's Max Pringle. The Bay Area Air Quality Management District has extended its Spare the Air alert for the San Francisco Bay Area through this Sunday. Mostly sunny in the San Francisco Bay Area, with highs in the upper 60s around the Bay tomorrow. Further inland, it will be mostly sunny with a high of 90 degrees. In the central San Joaquin Valley tomorrow, sunny, a high of 100 degrees, and partly cloudy skies in Los Angeles tomorrow, with highs in the mid-80s. That's it for the news tonight for this Friday, August 28th. Thanks for joining us. I'm Mark Miracle. Good evening.
This is a community announcement for August 2020. Yoga and Qigong instructor Amelia Barilli continues to offer a free 1-hour workshop via Zoom every Saturday. These workshops are designed to de-stress as well as boost and balance the immune system. A brief Q&A period is included. The Spanish language workshop is at 11 a.m. The English language workshop is at 3 p.m. The Zoom link is posted on her site at ameliabarilli.com. That's AMELIABARILI.com. She also has health information on her YouTube channel, The New Paradigms. This community announcement is produced by the First Voice Apprenticeship Program. Please send your event for consideration to calendar@kpfa.org. To hear this announcement again, call 510-848-6767, extension 621, or view it online at kpfa.org.